Story 1. This is a long one, but here goes. When I was about 14 or 15, my school had an awesome young science teacher, fresh out of university, eager to do well in his first job, passionate about his subject, and always staying late to help out the kids who needed the extra help. Unfortunately, he was super timid and shy, and not very good at handling behavioral issues. Naturally, the your kids, and even the ones you would expect better from, found it fun to completely take advantage of this. And it soon became a common game to just see who could do their best at making his life hell. I never saw him cry myself, but I did see him get pushed to his limits. And one day, I heard he had a bit of a breakdown. I can't remember exactly what I was told happened, but he fled a classroom on the verge of tears, and some of the other teachers needed to step in to get the class back under control. Anyway, one Monday, we found out he had passed away the day before from an undetected heart problem. His father went to his house the previous Sunday morning when he didn't turn up for their golf lesson, and found him dead in his bed. He was 24. Needless to say, all of the kids who tormented him felt absolutely awful about it. One girl in particular confided in me about how she felt so terrible. She knew he was a great teacher, but she joined in with the pack, and now she had to live with knowing this young, kind teacher died, and all she ever did was contribute to make his life difficult. A lesson for young Redditors. Treat your teachers well. They've dedicated themselves to giving you your education, something many people in this world aren't lucky enough to have. They're people like you and me, people just trying to do their jobs well. My mother is an English teacher, and the stress kids put her through resulted in her mental and physical health declining, to the point of needing to leave the job. Again, teachers are people, mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. Treat them like and you will grow up to regret it, and you'll deserve every ounce of the guilt you feel. Story 2. In middle school science, I had a teacher who was always so sweet. She was an older woman, and she always made sure we had materials for her class, often at her own expense. I remember she went out and bought like 20 plastic pencil cases and filled them with pencils, rulers, erasers, everything we would need for the class. One day, some of the kids decided to throw a few of the pencil cases across the room. They snapped some of the rulers and just generally broke a lot of things she provided for us while she stepped out for 5 minutes to talk to another teacher. When she came back, she started crying, and I remember feeling so bad for her. She gave the class little pieces of candy after, apologizing for losing control and getting emotional. We were the ones who should have been apologetic. She was so sweet to us, even though the class was full of demon children. Story 3. In 5th grade, we had a psychotic substitute teacher, probably in his late 50s. At the beginning of class, everyone was goofing off, and he immediately shut us down by screaming "shut up" at us, shaking furiously. We all stayed silent after that because he legit freaked us out. But we came to the conclusion that he was hearing voices in his head, because about 20 minutes into class, he abruptly stopped talking and screamed at us again at the top of his lungs that we would regret being so loud, but no one had uttered a f***ing word. He then stomped over to the desk, violently swept everything off, muttering the entire time to himself, then went to the back of the room and turned all of the lights off. We were all terrified at this point. He silently paced around the back of the room for a while, then went back to the front and slapped the chalkboard. His next words were what I remember the most clearly. He was violently shaking as he yelled, "I'm going to tell your teacher how horrible of a class you all are when she gets back, and I will make sure she burns you up. To hell with all of you." He threw himself back into the teacher's chair and started sobbing. One of my classmates managed to sneak out and get the principal. He was escorted from the classroom a few minutes later, and we all had to individually go into the principal's office and recount what happened. Apparently, he had just gotten a divorce, and he had lost it. He was fired that same day. Honestly, I don't think we actually did anything to warrant his initial reaction. He just snapped. Story 4. I'm a college teacher in the UK. Absolutely love my job. love helping the kids I teach, and love helping them reach their uni courses. Never really had many issues with most of my classes, but I had this one class that was really lazy, never did their work. They got a real result back one lesson. Average mark was like 30%. I said something in passing, and a student made a comment about how I shouldn't guilt trip them. I explained how I felt like I was working harder than they were, and I felt like I cared more about their result than they did, despite the fact that they would be going to uni. At the time, I was going through a breakup and was living in my car for a few days. And I cried then in front of that class. Awful moment, professionally speaking. Story 5. I had a French teacher once. We were her first class since becoming a teacher. Lovely woman, but many of us suspected she had mental health problems. She was always very quiet and mousy, and she always came in looking a bit messy, i.e., hair not brushed and makeup a bit smudged. There were these two girls who would just torment her. They had pickled muscles around the classroom and were just these loud, obnoxious assholes. Long story short, it turns out the teacher's mom had just died, and on top of the stress of managing a class with some real horrible kids, she had a nervous breakdown and never came back. About 2 years later, I was going to a concert and saw her begging for money outside a train station. Just felt so horrible seeing what she had been reduced to, all because of some nasty kids that just pushed her and pushed her. Story 6. Yes, in year 5, 9 to 10, we all had this small, pretty cool teacher take over our class because our usual teacher was out doing something. One day, we would not shut up. Something happened that got us kids all excited, and I was just doodling. I looked up to see the teacher just run out of the class in floods of tears. I then realized just how little attention the class was giving her and how much they cared because it took several minutes for everyone to notice she was gone, then went right back to talking. I felt really bad for that teacher because she was the only teacher in our year who got no respect from the students. Story 7. It was the end of the day, and a whole bunch of us 9-year-olds were getting ready to go home when this kid who was always trying to make trouble started arguing with the teacher about the next day's homework. And she made some comment about his mom, and then he made a rude joke about the teacher's mom, and she burst into tears and screamed her mom was dead. Then we sat in silence for like 5 minutes while the teacher cried. Also, that same teacher once came in crying in the morning, and when we asked what happened, she said one of her past students died of leukemia. The worst thing was that we saw that girl like a week before while the class was taking a walk in the woods, and she and her mom mentioned how she was recovering and was feeling so much better. Story 8. I remember in high school getting a teacher fresh out of uni. He was the best, super passionate about teaching, and would often incorporate music and comedy into his teaching to make it more interesting. Almost everyone in the class loved him because of it. There were 3 football players who would always play up in class though, and the teacher spent extra attention on them, trying to get them just as excited about learning as the rest of the class. But they were simply too cool to pay attention in class. One day, they took it too far. I can't remember the exact details, but I do remember that one of the football players threw a chair as a joke either at another student or at the teacher himself, and it just broke the poor guy. He lost his at the unruly students, and you could see the pure frustration in his face. He just wanted to teach, but these few students were hell-bent on ruining it for everyone. He ended up just leaving the classroom in tears, and everyone in the class quickly turned against the kids who threw the chair. Story 9. Multiple times. We were a terrible class. She was our 6th grade teacher. Our school had this odd system where you had a homeroom teacher for most of the day, but then rotated around to other teachers for just a few classes. Our homeroom teacher was also the music teacher, and for some reason during music class, all hell would break loose. She went on vacation for a week and came back with a bad sunburn around the eyes, so we would only call her Mrs. Raccoon. It caused her to get more tanning done. During one music class, she really had to go to the washroom, so she left for about 4 seconds and a fight broke out between a boy and a girl. The girl took the boy's head and threw it through a snare drum. He got stuck in there. She came back to thinking he was dead. Eventually, she had a mental breakdown mid-class and ran out into the hallway crying. The 7th grade teacher saw this and instead of consoling her, walked in and just let us have it. I will never forget that day. He said we were spoiled asshats for treating a teacher who only ever wanted to help us like trash. He screamed that if he had a teacher like her when he was a kid, he would do everything he could to keep her. Yelled that if we kept acting this way, we were in for a life of disappointment brought on by our own rampant incompetence. It worked. Some of us cried, but everyone felt horrible, and we were all nice to her for the remaining year. Story 10. It wasn't my class, but my twin brother's class when we were in grade 7. We went to a public school, which was full of delinquents. But his class was especially bad. They had a substitute teacher take over one of their classes for about a month, and one of the kids thought it would be hilarious if he pretended to be severely intellectually disabled. Looking back on it now, it was horrible, but at the time, everyone thought it was hilarious. He would moan words, throw books, water, spit on the floor, and dribble. The class played along with it, but they would all howl with laughter at him. The substitute kept saying things like, "He can't control it, stop bullying him." It got to a point where he was being especially bad with his disability, and everyone in class kept laughing. She ended up crying in the middle of class and later quit after she found out he had been pretending the entire time. Story 11. The whole class knew our teacher loved us so much. On her birthday, we decided to surprise her once she entered the classroom after the flag ceremony. We were divided into 2 groups. Some of us are together with the teacher during the flag ceremony, and some are waiting for the flag ceremony to end and are trying to hide in certain places in the classroom. The teacher had no clue of what was actually happening, and when she arrived together with some of our classmates, we started singing happy birthday to her. She was so shocked, you could clearly see her trying to hold back her tears. It was the class's most successful birthday surprise. If you're wondering what a flag ceremony is, in our country, it's held every Monday at 6:30 in the morning. The whole school gathers in a field or gymnasium to honor our country and sing our national anthem, while facing the flag, which will be raised by 3 Boy Scouts, and after that is reciting the national pledges. It follows a long process, starts with praying and ends after announcements, if there are any, and lasts for at least 30 seconds. Story 12. In 5th grade, my class was always extremely nasty to every substitute teacher that came in. They'd act out, doing and saying stupid shit, and though we never actually saw any of them cry, our regular teacher told us on multiple occasions that we'd left the substitute in tears after class was done. I hated every time there was a substitute, because it would always become show. Also, in middle school, we had a teacher that started out extremely chill. She said she didn't believe in yelling at students. Unfortunately, though, a lot of the same little from my 5th grade class were in this class too, plus new ones. I don't remember what the cause was exactly, but one day, she just snapped and screamed at us for a good 10 minutes. She definitely believed in yelling at students after that. It's one of the few things from middle school I remember clear as day. Story 13. No, but once in chemistry class, the teacher, Coach Burt, stopped writing on the board, looked straight ahead, and mumbled, "I could probably blow my brains all over this chalkboard and y'all wouldn't even notice." The only people that heard him were me and the girl I was talking to. I responded, "Coach, I think that's a dry erase board. Nobody uses chalk anymore." And he laughed, which made me feel slightly less concerned. Story 14. When I was in high school, we were misbehaving as a whole group, making noise, not listening, messing around, and finding just about everything that was happening far too funny. Nothing too major. A few of us got sent out to stand in the corridor until she got a handle on things. When she came out to speak to us, one dude was leaning up against the doorframe with his hand, and upon realizing we couldn't contain our laughter, She decided to leave us out there and stormed back into the class, slamming the door. It was at this point the dude screamed with the force of 1,000 suns. I hadn't heard anything quite like it. Teacher comes back out instantly, steam bellowing out of her ears, ready to completely destroy our childhoods. She turned to the kid and noticed the end of his finger hanging off, instantly realizing she'd shut it in the door. Her mood changed very quickly, and she just broke down into tears. I would have felt bad, but it just topped off the list of things I shouldn't have been laughing at already. Story 15. In 7th grade English, we were still breaking down parts of speech. Our teacher, let's call her Mrs. T, was trying extra hard to be happy and get our attention, and asked one of the worst behaved kids for an example of a sentence so we could break it down as a class. He waited till the room was silent, looked her dead in the eyes, and said, "Mrs. T is a bad teacher." She put it up on the board and broke it down through tears. Still makes me mad over 15 years later. Story 16. Not the class, but actually just me specifically. I had just graduated high school a few months ago, and I was going to visit the school to see my favorite teacher during the following fall. Pretty customary for graduates to do. They start college in the fall, then when they come back home for Thanksgiving break, they go to the high school and walk around to reconnect with their teachers. The thing was, I wasn't home on break from college. I was home because I had gotten diagnosed with cancer when I was about to start college. So when I went to visit, I was bald and had lost a good amount of weight, though I was feeling pretty good at that point. When I stepped in the doorway of his classroom, he was teaching a class, but it was the end of the period, so he was just wrapping things up. When he saw me there, he took a second to register that it was me. He immediately quieted and started tearing up. He stopped talking to the class and excused himself, then walked away and took a minute to gather himself. I had no idea I would impact someone like that. My heart dropped. He could hardly look at me. Not in a disgusted way or anything like that, just in pure shock and grief. Eventually, I talked to him and explained how everything was going well and I was going to be okay, but his eyes never stopped tearing and looked glazed over. A couple of days later, he emailed me saying he was so happy to have seen me, and that he was sorry he was so shaken, and he wanted to hear updates from me. Really crazy time. Story 17. When I was in middle school, we had an older teacher with a larger body and very thin legs. As such, she somewhat resembled a hen. It didn't help that she had a bit of a sagging underchin, shorter hair that looked like the top of a chicken's head, and a very pronounced nose. We had a new kid in class who appeared to have been held back a few times and had now landed in that class. The guy was an asshole in general, but the day he called her a chicken and then proceeded to mimic a clucking chicken, complete with arm wings, made me realize that she was probably aware of the likeness and may have dealt with people joking about it before. She immediately started crying and fled the room. Instruction was taken over by one of the vice principals for the rest of class, who used that time to admonish us on the dangers of being jerks. Later in college, I was taking an anthropology elective in an auditorium-sized lecture hall. The professor had a very thick Indian accent. I apologize, I don't know enough about the region to specify which dialect, but was still very much understandable. During a lecture on dialects and the concept of texts, she commented about how these can lead to miscommunications between different regional groups, and one student yelled from the back of the lecture hall, "Oh, so it's hard when you can't understand what the someone is saying?" The professor got quiet for a moment before muttering, "I have no words. Class is dismissed." She gathered her stuff and left the lecture hall. I felt so bad for her. The next lecture, some higher up in her department came along and addressed the class about how that level of disrespect was absurd at an institution of higher learning. I'm not even sure if the guy who said it was there. I had a few takeaways from these incidents. First, as shitty as middle school kids can be, nobody joined in on the joke with asshole number 1, and asshole 2 caught a lot of "what the is wrong with you" looks in the lecture hall. Second, in the case of the college professor, her level of professionalism was astounding. The next class, after the higher-up was done talking to us, she continued as if nothing had happened. Even when it happened, she gathered herself enough to properly dismiss the class. It was inspirational in a surreal kind of way.